The Mafia boss's daughter wouldn't stop crying until the Black Maid song revealed her secret past. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now let's begin. Inside the lavish mansion, the sound of a small child's sobbing echoed down the long corridors. The grand chandeliers above glimmered in the dim light, casting golden reflections on the marble floors. But in the room at the end of the hallway, a different scene unfolded. The Mafia boss's daughter, barely 5 years old, sat curled up on the plush velvet couch, her tiny body shaking with each tear that fell. Her father, the notorious Mafia boss, paced restlessly by the window, glancing out with furrowed brows. He had never known how to handle moments like this, how to comfort his little girl. No matter how hard he tried, nothing seemed to make her stop crying. The staff had already tried their best, dolls, candy, even the finest toys money could buy, but the little girl refused to be soothed. She cried for hours, as though the pain inside her was far deeper than any of the luxuries surrounding her. Her mother had been gone for over a year now, and though the Mafia boss had done everything in his power to shield his daughter from the harsh realities of their world, it was becoming clear that something was missing. The girl needed something more than wealth and luxury. She needed love, something that no amount of money could provide. As the girl's cries filled the air, the Mafia boss's eyes flickered with frustration. He had seen every form of violence imaginable, dealt with enemies who wanted to kill him, and yet this was beyond his reach. He didn't know how to fix it. He didn't know how to fix her. But then, from behind him, there was a soft knock at the door. It was the Black Maid, the woman who had been quietly serving the family for years. She had always been the one who seemed to know what to do when things fell apart. Without saying a word, she entered the room, her presence calm and grounded, a stark contrast to the chaos swirling in the child's cries. She walked over to the little girl, who was still trembling on the couch, her small fists clenched. Gently, the maid sat down beside her, her eyes warm and compassionate. For a moment, she simply sat there, letting the child's sobs wash over her. The Mafia boss stood back, watching with a mixture of curiosity and uncertainty. He had never seen the maid interact with his daughter in such a way. Slowly, the maid began to hum a soft, soothing tune. It was an old lullaby, one that seemed to carry a sense of comfort from a time long past. As her gentle voice filled the room, something unexpected happened. The girl's cries began to soften, her body slowly relaxing as the song seemed to reach deep into her heart. The Mafia boss couldn't believe his eyes. His daughter, who had refused to be consoled for hours, was now quiet, her breathing evening out. She wasn't smiling, but for the first time that day, she was at peace. The room seemed to calm with her, the tension that had filled the air lifting as the lullaby continued. The Mafia boss stood frozen, his eyes fixed on the maid, who continued to hum with a peaceful expression. In that moment, he realized something he had never truly acknowledged before. This woman, the maid, had a power far beyond the wealth and strength he had. It wasn't money or status that brought peace. It was something deeper. She understood what his daughter needed in a way he could never have. The girl's eyes fluttered closed, and she finally drifted into a peaceful sleep. The Mafia boss stood there, silently processing what had just happened. He had spent years building an empire, ruling with strength and fear, but in the face of his daughter's pain, he had been powerless. It was this simple, quiet act of kindness that had healed her. The maid stood up slowly, her job done, and turned to leave. But before she could, the Mafia boss spoke. "Thank you," he said, his voice rough with emotion. The maid turned to face him, a soft smile on her lips. "It was my pleasure, sir." As she left the room, the Mafia boss stood in silence, contemplating the power of kindness. He had just witnessed something far stronger than any weapon or fortune, something that had the power to heal even the deepest wounds. The Mafia boss stood silently in the doorway, watching his daughter sleep peacefully on the plush velvet couch. Her sobs had stopped, her small face serene in the light of the golden chandeliers. It was a rare moment of calm in a house that was usually filled with tension, secrets, and power. His mind raced, still unable to fully comprehend the events that had just unfolded. His daughter, who had been inconsolable for hours, had found peace through the soft, simple song of the Black Maid. He had always been able to command men with a single word, to instill fear and respect, but this was different. The maid had done what money and authority could not. He had seen the power of kindness, and it unsettled him. As he turned to leave, he glanced back at his daughter one last time. The house seemed to quiet itself in the wake of the lullaby. He stepped into the hallway and found the maid waiting by the door, her hands folded neatly in front of her. She had been standing there for some time, and although her expression remained calm, there was a certain stillness in her eyes that suggested she knew exactly what had just transpired. He could not shake the feeling that she was more than just a servant in his household. Her presence was more than just a function of duty. There was a depth to her that he could not quite place. "You've done more than I could ever ask," the Mafia boss said, his voice surprisingly soft. The maid gave a small, respectful nod. "It was no trouble, sir. Your daughter needed comfort, and I simply gave what I could." Her voice was gentle, but there was an underlying strength to it, one that resonated deeply with him. "She's a sensitive child," the Mafia boss murmured, glancing back at the door to his daughter's room. "I've tried, but sometimes I don't know how to reach her." The maid hesitated for a moment, then spoke, her tone even and kind. "Children need more than what we give them. They need connection, warmth. Sometimes, we forget that even the strongest of us are just human, and so are they." The Mafia boss's eyes narrowed slightly, but he said nothing. The words hit harder than he cared to admit. For the first time in years, he realized that his wealth and power had not been enough to shield his daughter from the pain of losing her mother, from the hollow space that lingered in her heart. The maid had filled that void in a way he could not. He felt a twinge of something unfamiliar, vulnerability, perhaps, or regret. "I don't know how to fix this," he admitted quietly, his gaze shifting to the hallway floor. "I've built an empire, but I've failed her in ways I can't repair." The maid studied him for a moment before speaking. "She doesn't need fixing, sir. She needs someone who will listen, someone who will show her that it's okay to feel, to grieve. That's something no empire can provide." His heart tightened, a weight pressing down on his chest. How many times had he told himself that he could control everything, that no problem was too big for his resources? And yet, here he was, standing in the hallway of his mansion, humbled by the words of a woman who had nothing but her compassion to offer. For the first time, he realized that his empire meant nothing if he couldn't offer his daughter the one thing she needed most: love and comfort. He looked at the maid, his voice firm but with a new sense of respect. "I want you to stay here, not just as staff. You'll have a place in this house, a real place. My daughter needs you, and I need you to help me. Help us." The maid's expression softened, and she nodded once again. "I will do whatever I can, sir." As she turned to leave, the Mafia boss stood still, his mind spinning. He had always prided himself on his ability to control situations, to bend people to his will. But here, in the quiet of the mansion, he had realized something that would change everything. Power was not in domination or fear. It was in understanding, in empathy. He watched the maid walk down the hallway, her footsteps quiet against the polished floor, and for the first time in years, he felt a flicker of hope for the future. He was not the only one who could shape his daughter's world. Maybe, just maybe, the kindness of someone else could do what he never could. The Mafia boss stood in the hallway, his thoughts a whirlwind of confusion and realization. His mind kept returning to the words the maid had spoken, simple yet profound. His empire, built on years of ruthless power and control, had never prepared him for this moment. He had never considered that the answer to his daughter's pain might lie not in more riches or stronger guards, but in the quiet, compassionate presence of someone like the maid. He turned to walk toward his daughter's room, his mind heavy with the weight of his responsibilities. The quiet lullaby still echoed in his ears as he entered the room. His daughter was sleeping soundly now, her tiny body curled up peacefully beneath the soft blanket. The maid had left hours ago, but her calming influence lingered in the air. The Mafia boss stared at his daughter, his heart aching as he thought about how far they had drifted. He had spent so much time focused on building his empire, on making sure there was always money, power, and protection, but he had neglected the one thing that truly mattered, his daughter's heart. As he gazed at her, he realized just how deeply his own failure had affected her. The absence of her mother had left a void that no amount of wealth could fill. She needed love, affection, and stability, things that only a parent could provide. But even more than that, she needed understanding, something he had never been able to offer. He had always been so focused on control, on dominance, that he had forgotten the importance of simply being there for her, of being present. He sat down beside her, gently brushing a lock of hair from her face. She stirred slightly but remained asleep, her breathing steady. For the first time in a long while, the Mafia boss allowed himself to feel vulnerable. He wasn't invincible. He wasn't the untouchable man he had always believed himself to be. His empire meant nothing if it couldn't give him the one thing he desired most: peace for his daughter. His thoughts were interrupted by a soft knock at the door. It was the maid. She stood in the doorway, her presence as calm and composed as ever. She didn't speak at first, merely observing the scene before her. The Mafia boss didn't need her to say anything. He knew what she was thinking. "She's sleeping," he murmured, his voice softer than usual. The maid nodded, her gaze lingering on the girl. "She'll be all right now, but there's still work to be done." The Mafia boss turned to face her. "I don't know what to do," he confessed, the words heavy on his chest. "I've spent my whole life building an empire, but I don't know how to build a relationship with my own daughter. I don't know how to make her happy." The maid's gaze softened. She stepped into the room, her eyes never leaving the child. "You've already taken the first step, sir," she said quietly. "You're here. You're present. That's all she really needs." He looked at her, surprised by her words. "But she needs more than that," he argued. "She needs love. She needs someone who will show her that she's worth it." The maid interrupted gently. "Someone who will listen when she needs to speak. Someone who will stay when she needs comfort. She doesn't need a man who rules with fear. She needs a father who loves her unconditionally." His chest tightened as her words sank in. He had always thought that love meant providing for her, keeping her safe from harm. But love was more than that. Love was about being there, truly being there, for her. He looked at the maid, a newfound respect in his eyes. She had a way of cutting through his walls, of seeing things he had refused to acknowledge. "What should I do?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "How can I make it right?" The maid met his gaze, her expression kind but firm. "You need to show her that she can trust you," she said simply. "Be the man who supports her, not the one who demands control." The Mafia boss nodded slowly, the weight of her words settling in. He had spent so much of his life controlling every aspect of his world, but now he realized that the most important thing was not control, but connection. As he sat there beside his daughter, he made a promise to himself. He would change. For her. The days that followed were quiet, filled with small but meaningful moments. The Mafia boss began spending more time with his daughter, sitting with her in the evenings, reading her stories, and simply listening to her when she spoke. It wasn't always easy. He had no idea how to be the father she needed, but he was learning. And with each passing day, he saw the change in her. The pain that had once been so apparent in her eyes began to fade, replaced by a spark of hope and trust. It wasn't perfect, and it wouldn't happen overnight, but for the first time in a long while, the Mafia boss felt like he was doing something right. As he looked at his daughter one evening, her small hand in his, he realized that this was what he had been fighting for all along. Not power, not wealth, but family. And in that moment, he understood what it meant to truly be strong. The Mafia boss walked slowly down the long hallway, his footsteps echoing softly against the polished marble floors. His mind was a maze of thoughts, all circling back to his daughter. The time he had spent with her in the past few days had been eye-opening. He had begun to realize just how much he had missed in her life, and just how much she had missed in his. But despite his newfound resolve to be a better father, there was still a part of him that felt lost, unsure of how to truly break through the walls she had built around her heart. As he reached the end of the hallway, he paused in front of her bedroom door. He had spent years running his empire, making decisions that affected the lives of hundreds. Yet this, being a father, felt like the most important and difficult role he had ever undertaken. He knocked softly, not wanting to disturb her, but feeling a need to check on her one last time before the night was over. "Come in," came her small voice from the other side. He pushed the door open gently, finding her sitting by the window, staring out into the night. The soft glow of the city lights outside illuminated her face, casting shadows that made her look older than her years. She hadn't noticed him enter, and for a moment, he simply watched her. She was no longer the same girl who had cried endlessly just a few days ago. She was quiet now, reflective, as though she were carrying the weight of the world on her small shoulders. It broke his heart. He stepped into the room and sat down beside her, carefully choosing his words. "How are you feeling?" he asked softly, his voice hesitant. She turned to look at him, her eyes still heavy with the pain of the past. "I'm fine," she replied. But there was an emptiness in her tone that he couldn't ignore. He could see it in her eyes, the lingering sadness that had yet to fully fade. He knew that the journey to heal her wasn't going to be easy, and that simply being present wouldn't be enough. He needed to do more. He needed to show her that he was there for her, not just as her father, but as someone who understood her pain. He reached out and gently took her hand in his, a simple gesture that felt like a lifetime of unspoken words. "I know I haven't been the father you needed," he said quietly, his voice thick with emotion. "But I'm trying. I want to be here for you. I want you to know that you don't have to carry this alone." She looked at him, her expression softening, but the silence between them hung in the air like a heavy weight. She pulled her hand back gently, a small frown forming on her lips. "I don't need you to fix it," she whispered. "I just need you to be here." The words hit him harder than he expected. It wasn't about fixing things, wasn't about solving problems with his usual cold efficiency. It was about being present, about showing up for her when she needed him the most. He realized then that this was the hardest thing he had ever had to do, not control the world around him, not build an empire, but simply to be the father his daughter needed him to be. The realization struck him like a jolt of electricity. He wasn't the man who could dominate the world, the man who could instill fear in others. No, he was the man who had to learn how to love, how to nurture, and how to support his daughter. He didn't have all the answers, and he didn't know how to make the pain go away. But he would be there, every step of the way. As he sat there, his daughter's small figure silhouetted against the window, he made a silent vow. No matter what it took, he would never stop trying. He would be the father she needed, even if it meant sacrificing everything he had built. The days that followed were filled with small steps forward. The Mafia boss continued to spend time with his daughter, but now, instead of simply being present, he made an effort to connect with her on a deeper level. He listened to her when she spoke, he held her when she cried, and most importantly, he showed her that it was okay to feel. She wasn't alone anymore. The pain that had once seemed so insurmountable began to soften. She started to open up, to trust him again. Slowly but surely, the walls that had once kept her distant began to crumble. It wasn't a perfect journey, but it was theirs. And for the first time in a long while, the Mafia boss felt like he was finally getting something right. One evening, as they sat together in the garden, the Mafia boss turned to her, a sense of pride swelling in his chest. "I'm proud of you," he said, his voice steady. "You've come so far." His daughter looked at him, her eyes bright. "I'm proud of you too, Dad," she said quietly. "I never thought you'd understand, but you do." And in that moment, the Mafia boss realized that everything he had worked for, everything he had sacrificed, had led him here. To this moment, with his daughter. And that was enough. The Mafia boss sat at his desk, his fingers drumming idly on the polished surface. The mansion was quiet, the usual hum of activity replaced by an eerie stillness. He had spent years building his empire, making enemies and allies alike, but nothing had prepared him for the path he was now walking: fatherhood. He glanced at the framed picture of his daughter on the desk. She was smiling in the photo, her eyes bright with the innocence he had longed to protect. The guilt that had weighed heavily on him in the past few weeks had not eased, but he knew that he was no longer the man he once was. The phone on his desk rang, breaking his thoughts. He picked it up without a second thought, already knowing who it would be. "Boss, we've got a situation," his trusted associate. Marco's voice came through the line, steady but urgent. "What kind of situation?" The Mafia boss's tone was sharp. "It's about your daughter," Marco replied, his voice laced with concern. The Mafia boss felt his heart stop. "What's happened?" he asked, his pulse quickening. "There's been a development," Marco said, his voice tight with apprehension. "She's been seen with someone from the outside. Someone we don't recognize." The Mafia boss stood up, his chair scraping across the floor. His mind raced, and a dark feeling crept over him. Where is she now? She's safe for now, but we need to figure out what this means. We can't afford to take any chances. The Mafia boss clenched his fist around the phone. The world he had so carefully crafted, built on control and fear, was now being threatened by something he couldn't control, his daughter's choices. For the first time, he felt a sense of powerlessness that he had never experienced before. The thought of someone from the outside influencing her, especially without his knowledge, sent a chill down his spine. His empire had been built on secrecy, on dominance, and he had always kept a tight grip on everything. But his daughter was different. She was not a pawn to be controlled. She was his daughter, and no matter what, he would protect her. The Mafia boss took a deep breath, trying to calm the storm of thoughts racing through his mind. Give me the details, he ordered. I want to know everything about this person, and I want eyes on her at all times. I don't care who they are. We're not letting anyone get close. Understood, Marco replied. We'll get the information to you as soon as we have it. The Mafia boss hung up the phone and stood there for a moment, the weight of the situation settling heavily on his shoulders. He could feel his instincts kicking in, the same ones that had made him a feared figure in the underworld. But this time, the stakes were higher. This time, it wasn't about power or money. This time, it was about his daughter. His mind flashed back to the moments he had spent with her, the quiet evenings when they sat together in the garden, the first time she had smiled at him in what felt like forever. He had promised himself that he would be there for her, that he would do better. But now, as the threat loomed closer, he felt the old, familiar urge to control everything, to eliminate the threat before it could even begin. But deep down, he knew that he couldn't do that, not with her. She needed space to grow, to make her own choices. She didn't need him to be a tyrant. She needed him to be a father. And he had failed her in that regard for far too long. The door to his office opened, and the maid stepped inside, her presence as calm and composed as always. She gave him a small nod, and he returned it, his gaze still focused on the phone in his hand. She's safe, he muttered under his breath, though the words didn't feel like they held any weight. The maid, sensing the shift in his demeanor, stepped closer. What's happened? She asked, her voice gentle. The Mafia boss looked up at her, his expression clouded with frustration. Someone's been watching her, he said, his voice low. I don't know who they are, but they've been getting too close. I can't let that happen. The maid nodded slowly, her expression thoughtful. You're worried, she said simply. I understand. The Mafia boss looked at her, surprised by her understanding. He was used to people reacting with fear or submission, not empathy. I don't know what to do, he confessed, his voice rough. I've never been in this situation before. The maid regarded him quietly, her gaze soft yet firm. You don't have to do it alone, she said gently. You've already made the first step by being there for her. You've shown her that you care, and that's what matters most. Don't lose sight of that. The Mafia boss stood still, taking in her words. There was truth in them, more truth than he wanted to admit. He had spent so many years building his walls, so many years running his empire with an iron fist, that he had forgotten how to just be a father. But now, as the threat to his daughter loomed closer, he understood that he couldn't protect her by force alone. He had to be present for her, not just as her protector, but as her father. For the first time, he understood that being there for her, truly being there for her, was the greatest form of protection he could offer. He looked at the maid, a silent understanding passing between them. She had been right all along. He didn't need to control everything. He needed to let go, to trust, and to be there for his daughter in a way that he never had before. With a deep breath, he turned back to the phone and dialed Marco's number again. Get me everything on this person, he said firmly. And keep my daughter safe. We're not losing her. The Mafia boss hung up the phone with a new sense of resolve. The battle wasn't over, but this time, it wasn't just about power. It was about love, and that was something he would fight for until the very end. The Mafia boss stood in the study, staring at the information Marco had just brought him. His mind raced as he processed everything. The mysterious person who had been getting close to his daughter, their connections, and the potential danger that was looming. It was a name he didn't recognize, and yet, something about the situation felt too familiar. The weight of his responsibilities pressed on him more than ever, and he felt the gnawing urge to take control, to fix the situation before it escalated further. His daughter, the one bright spot in his otherwise cold world, was now caught in the crosshairs of something he couldn't entirely grasp. He couldn't let anything happen to her. Not now. Not after everything he had promised her. He ran a hand over his face, trying to clear his thoughts, but his mind kept returning to the same question. How had he let things get so far out of hand? He had spent years keeping people at arm's length, controlling everything around him with a firm hand. But now, as a father, he was faced with something far more delicate, something that couldn't be managed with power alone. He needed to protect her, but he had to do it in a way that wouldn't push her away. As he stood there, staring at the cold, hard facts in front of him, a knock came at the door. Marco entered, his face tense with urgency. "Boss," he said quietly, his voice full of caution, "we've found something. We've traced the person who's been around your daughter." The Mafia boss's heart skipped a beat. "Who are they?" he asked, his voice steely, betraying none of the fear that was beginning to take root inside him. Marco hesitated before responding. "It's someone from outside the usual circles. A contact connected to one of your old associates. Someone from a past you've tried to leave behind." The Mafia boss felt a chill run down his spine. His past had a way of coming back to haunt him, and now it seemed to be reaching for the one person he cared about most. He took a deep breath, steadying himself. "Do we know what their intentions are?" Marco looked uncomfortable, shifting on his feet. "Not yet, but we can't afford to take any chances. We need to act fast." The Mafia boss nodded, his mind already calculating the next steps. He couldn't let this threat get any closer to his daughter. He had learned the hard way that people from his past were never truly gone. They just bided their time, waiting for the right moment to strike. "Get our people on it," the Mafia boss ordered. "I want to know everything about this person, who they are, what they want, and how they're connected to my daughter. We can't risk her being involved in this." Marco nodded and turned to leave, but the Mafia boss called out to him before he could step out the door. "Marco!" He turned back, meeting the Mafia boss's gaze. "Make sure we keep this quiet. No one can know about this." "Not yet." Marco gave him a sharp nod and exited, leaving the Mafia boss alone with his thoughts once again. The silence in the study was almost suffocating. The Mafia boss sank into his chair, running a hand through his hair. He knew that the danger was real, that his past was coming back to claim what it had lost. But what troubled him more was the growing sense of helplessness that had begun to creep into his chest. He had always prided himself on being in control, on being the one who held the reins of his life. But now, as he stared at the documents in front of him, he realized that control was slipping through his fingers. His daughter's safety depended on him, and for the first time, he wasn't sure if he had the power to protect her. The minutes ticked by, the weight of his thoughts pressing down harder with each passing second. He had made a promise to her, that he would be there for her, that he would do better. But now, it felt like everything was unraveling, and he was powerless to stop it. He stood abruptly, walking toward the window and staring out into the night. The city was alive below, the lights twinkling in the distance, but all he could see was the looming threat to his daughter's safety. The darkness outside mirrored the storm brewing inside him. His mind kept returning to the image of her, his daughter, the one person in his life who had never asked for anything but his love. And now, she was caught in a situation that he couldn't control, a situation that was far beyond his reach. He had tried to protect her by keeping her sheltered, by keeping her away from the dangers of his world, but he realized now that he couldn't protect her from everything. Not when the danger came from within his own past. He took a deep breath, his resolve hardening. He wouldn't let this happen. He couldn't let his past destroy the future he had promised her. The door opened again, and this time, it was the maid who entered. She stood quietly by the door, her presence calming in the midst of the storm raging inside him. "Sir," she said softly, "I'm here if you need anything." The Mafia boss turned to face her, his expression unreadable. "I need you to stay close to her," he said, his voice steady but filled with an underlying urgency. "Make sure she's safe. I don't care what it takes, just keep her away from the danger." The maid nodded, her gaze soft yet firm. "Of course, sir." The Mafia boss met her eyes, a silent understanding passing between them. For the first time in a long while, he realized that he wasn't alone in this fight. He had people he could trust, people who cared about his daughter just as much as he did. And with that realization, a small spark of hope ignited within him. He wasn't going to let his past destroy everything he had worked for. Not now. Not when he had finally found something worth protecting. His daughter was his future, and he would fight for her with everything he had. The Mafia boss paced back and forth in his office, the weight of his thoughts heavier than ever. Marco had delivered the news. His daughter had been in contact with someone from his past. Someone who, by all accounts, should have been left behind long ago. The name Marco had mentioned didn't just send a chill down his spine. It reopened wounds he had spent years trying to forget. The past, it seemed, was not as distant as he had hoped. The thought of his daughter being involved in this world, the world he had worked so hard to shield her from, made his stomach churn. He had never expected this. He had thought he could control everything. He had always prided himself on his ability to keep his enemies at bay, to ensure his family's safety by keeping them hidden away in the cocoon of his empire. But now, that very empire was crumbling at the edges. His daughter, the one person he had promised to protect above all else, was unknowingly walking in the very footsteps of a life he had desperately wanted to keep her from. The world he had created, the empire of power, money, and fear, was now a threat to the one thing he held most dear. The tension in his chest built as he clenched his fists, the room feeling smaller with each passing second. He couldn't let this happen. He wouldn't. His daughter deserved more than this. He had promised to be a better father, and this was his test. But how could he protect her from a world that was always just a step behind, lurking in the shadows of their everyday lives? The door opened, and the maid entered quietly, her presence steady and calm. She had become an unexpected ally in his journey as a father, someone he could rely on when everything else seemed uncertain. He met her gaze as she stood by the door. "What is it?" he asked, his voice low and tight with tension. She stepped forward, her expression soft yet determined. "You're worried about her," she said simply. "And I can see why." The Mafia boss didn't reply. His mind was racing, and he couldn't find the words to express the overwhelming fear that gripped him. His daughter, the little girl who had once held his hand and trusted him, was now exposed to the dangers he had long tried to protect her from. He had tried to be the strong, invincible figure in her life, but now, in the face of real danger, he realized that he wasn't. "She deserves better," he muttered. "She deserves a life away from all of this. A life where she's not burdened by my mistakes." The maid looked at him with understanding, her voice gentle. "You've done more for her than you realize. Being here for her, showing up, that's what matters most. But you can't protect her from everything, and you can't carry the weight of this on your own." He turned to face her, his eyes narrowing. "What do you mean?" The maid's gaze softened. "You can't fix everything. The world you're trying to shield her from is still there, but it's not about removing her from it. It's about teaching her how to navigate it, how to protect herself." The words hit him harder than he expected. He had spent so much of his life trying to control the uncontrollable, but he was starting to understand what she meant. He couldn't shield his daughter from every danger. What mattered now was making sure she knew how to protect herself, how to survive in a world that wasn't always kind. The Mafia boss took a deep breath, the weight of the responsibility settling heavily on his shoulders. "But she's just a child," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "She's not ready for this." The maid's expression softened further, and she stepped closer. "She doesn't need to be ready for everything. She needs you to show her how to be strong, how to make the right choices. The rest, she'll figure out in time." He looked at her, his chest tight with the realization that this wasn't about control. It was about trust. It was about being the father his daughter needed, even when the world around them seemed intent on pulling them apart. "What do I do now?" he asked quietly. The maid stood still for a moment, her gaze steady. "You keep being there for her. Show her she's not alone. And when the time comes, you teach her how to protect herself. That's the best gift you can give her." The Mafia boss nodded, a sense of determination rising within him. He would fight for his daughter's safety, but he wouldn't fight in the way he had fought all these years. He would fight by showing up, by being present, and by teaching her how to stand on her own 2 feet. The world might try to pull them apart, but he would make sure she knew how to stand firm in the face of it all. As the maid turned to leave, he called out to her. "Thank you," he said quietly, "for everything." She turned back to him, her expression warm. "It's my honor, sir," she replied before leaving the room. The Mafia boss stood there for a moment, the weight of his responsibilities now clearer than ever. He would do whatever it took to protect his daughter, but he would do it in a way that allowed her to grow, to thrive, and to survive in the world he had once tried to shield her from. He was ready. He would fight for her. The Mafia boss stood in the dimly lit hallway, his hand gripping the edge of the doorframe, staring into the room where his daughter had just finished playing with her toys. She was sitting on the floor, humming a soft tune, completely unaware of the world that seemed to be closing in around her. He had tried to shield her from the dangerous web that surrounded their lives, but now, as the tension between their worlds grew stronger, he realized he couldn't protect her forever. His thoughts wandered to the mysterious person who had been getting too close to his daughter. His mind kept returning to the name Marco had mentioned, someone from his past he had hoped would never resurface. It was as though fate had conspired against him. The past, it seemed, had a way of catching up with you, no matter how fast you ran. He couldn't ignore it any longer. The danger was real, and it was getting closer to his daughter. He had spent his entire life building walls, surrounding himself with power and influence. But now he faced a threat that wasn't just physical. It was emotional. His daughter, the one bright light in his otherwise dark world, was at the center of it. She needed him, not just as her protector, but as her father. The Mafia boss knew that his empire, the very foundation of his existence, was not enough to shield her. He had to be more than just a figurehead. He had to be a real father, someone who could guide her through the chaos. Someone she could trust with her fears and her heart. He took a deep breath, pushing the weight of his responsibilities aside, and stepped into the room. His daughter looked up at him, her small face lighting up with a smile that made his chest tighten. For a moment, he forgot everything else, the danger, the uncertainty, and allowed himself to simply be a father. She stood up, running toward him with open arms. "Daddy," she said, her voice filled with joy. He knelt down to embrace her, wrapping his arms around her tiny body, feeling the warmth of her presence. It was moments like these, small and simple, that reminded him why he had spent so long fighting for this family. But he knew it wasn't enough. He couldn't keep her safe by just holding her close. The world outside was waiting to tear them apart. "How was your day?" he asked softly, brushing a strand of hair from her face. She smiled up at him, her innocence shining through despite the dangers lurking just outside. "It was fun. I played with my toys and sang my favorite song." He smiled back, his heart aching with the knowledge that her happiness was fragile, that everything he had worked for was now on the line. He could no longer pretend that his power and wealth were enough. His daughter needed more than just material things. She needed love, stability, and protection from the chaos that surrounded them. "That's good, sweetheart," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "But there's something I need to talk to you about." She tilted her head, her curiosity piqued. He took her hand, guiding her to the small couch by the window. They sat together, and for a moment, he just watched her, his heart heavy with the weight of what he was about to say. "I've been doing some thinking," he began, his voice steady despite the turmoil inside. "There are things happening that I can't explain, things that could hurt you, and I need you to promise me something." She looked up at him with wide eyes, her small fingers gripping his hand. "What is it, Daddy?" "I need you to always tell me the truth," he said, his voice firm but gentle. "If anyone ever makes you feel uncomfortable or tries to hurt you in any way, I want you to tell me. You can always talk to me, no matter what." His daughter nodded slowly, her innocence still intact, but there was a flicker of understanding in her eyes. She didn't fully grasp the weight of his words, but she knew enough to trust him. "I promise, Daddy." The Mafia boss sighed, feeling the tension in his chest loosen just a bit. He had done everything in his power to shield her, to protect her from the dangers of his world, but he realized that the best thing he could do now was to teach her how to navigate it. He had to let her know that she wasn't alone, that she had someone in her corner, someone who would always be there for her. As they sat there, side by side, the reality of the situation hit him. The world he had built, the empire of fear and power, was no place for a child. He had been so focused on building walls to protect her that he had forgotten the most important thing, letting her in. He needed to be a part of her life, not just her protector, but someone she could turn to for guidance, for love, and for support. He looked at her, his heart swelling with a new sense of purpose. "I will always protect you," he promised quietly. "No matter what happens, you will never be alone." His daughter smiled, her innocent trust in him unwavering. He knew that he couldn't shield her from everything, but he would do everything in his power to make sure she felt safe, loved, and cared for. As the evening wore on, the Mafia boss couldn't shake the feeling that something was changing within him. The empire he had built no longer mattered. It was his family that mattered now. And no matter what the future held, he would fight for them. He would fight for her. The Mafia boss sat in his office, the weight of the situation pressing down on him like a storm cloud. His daughter was asleep, but the uneasy feeling in his chest refused to let him rest. His past had always been a dark shadow, something he could keep at bay with power and influence. But now, as the walls around him began to close in, he realized that the darkness was inching closer to the one thing he cared about most, his daughter. He had tried to shield her, to give her a life of comfort and safety, but the truth was, he couldn't protect her from everything. The knock on his door broke his thoughts, and Marco stepped in, his expression grim. "Boss, we have a situation," he said, his voice tense. The Mafia boss' heart sank. "What now?" Marco hesitated, his eyes flickering with hesitation. "It's about your daughter. The person we were tracking, they've made contact with her again." The Mafia boss felt the blood drain from his face. His mind raced as he thought of the worst possible outcomes. "What do you mean, contact?" he asked, his voice sharp. Marco exhaled slowly, stepping closer to the desk. "She's been meeting with him. They've been talking, and we have evidence that he's been watching her. We believe he's trying to get close." The Mafia boss stood, his chair scraping harshly against the floor. "I knew it. I knew this wouldn't end quietly." He began pacing, the frustration building inside him. "I've protected her, I've kept her safe, and now this person from my past is threatening everything." Marco's eyes softened slightly. "Boss, we're doing everything we can to track him, but we need your decision. Should we intervene directly?" The Mafia boss stopped pacing, his fists clenched at his sides. "No, I need to handle this. This isn't just about power, it's about something more. I can't let this happen to her." Marco nodded, understanding the weight of the decision. "We'll be ready, but we're behind you no matter what you decide." The Mafia boss turned, his gaze lingering on the window where the lights of the city flickered in the distance. "I've spent my entire life building this empire, keeping people at bay, controlling everything in my world. But she's different. She doesn't belong in this world, and I can't let it destroy her. I won't." His voice was low, thick with emotion. Marco didn't speak, knowing better than to interrupt. The Mafia boss had always been a man of action, but now, for the first time in his life, he was faced with something he couldn't control, something that wasn't just about power. It was about his daughter's safety. He walked to the desk, picking up the photograph of his daughter that sat there. Her smile was innocent, carefree, a stark contrast to the dangerous world they lived in. She had no idea what was coming, and he wasn't sure if she would ever truly understand the lengths he would go to protect her. But he knew one thing for sure. He would do whatever it took to keep her safe. He set the photo down, his resolve hardening. "I'll handle this myself," he said, his voice firm. "No more games. No more waiting. It's time to confront this." Marco nodded, but before he could speak, the Mafia boss turned back to him. "Make sure the people I trust are in place. I'll need their support, but this is my fight. Do you understand?" Marco hesitated for a moment, but then gave a single nod. "Understood." The Mafia boss strode to the door, opening it, and stepping out into the hallway. He walked down the corridor, his thoughts focused on what needed to be done. As he approached his daughter's room, he paused, the door slightly ajar. He could hear her soft breathing as she slept peacefully, unaware of the storm brewing just outside. He stood there for a moment, watching her, feeling a rush of protectiveness wash over him. This was why he had fought so hard for everything he had. Not for the power, not for the wealth, but for her. She was the only thing that mattered. And now, he had to make sure that nothing, no one, could take her away from him. He pushed the door open gently and walked into the room, his eyes lingering on her peaceful form. He bent down, brushing a stray lock of hair from her face, and whispered softly, "I promise, I'll never let anything happen to you." His heart ached with the weight of the promise, but he knew that the fight wasn't over. It had only just begun. The Mafia boss turned and walked out of the room, closing the door behind him. As he descended the stairs, he felt a sense of purpose settle in his chest. The danger was real, but so was his determination to protect his daughter. Whatever it took, whatever sacrifices he had to make, he would fight to the very end. His empire, his power, meant nothing if he couldn't protect the one person who meant everything to him. And he would not fail her. The Mafia boss stood outside the mansion, his hands in his pockets, his eyes staring out into the night. The city beyond shimmered with its usual buzz, yet inside, a storm raged. His thoughts were sharp, focused on the plan that was now set in motion. He had made his promise to his daughter, but the battle to protect her was far from over. He had done everything he could to shield her, but it was clear that the past was determined to catch up with him. The mysterious person who had been getting close to his daughter had started making moves, and now it was time to confront this threat head-on. The Mafia boss had spent decades building an empire founded on power, control, and fear. But those things meant nothing when it came to his daughter. He wasn't sure how he had allowed it to get this far, but he knew one thing for certain. He couldn't allow his past to destroy her future. He had tried to separate his daughter from the world he lived in, to protect her from the darkness he had created. But now, the darkness was right at their door, and he wasn't sure how much longer he could keep it at bay. He needed answers. The man from his past was close, and his intentions were unclear. The Mafia boss had made enemies throughout the years, and it wasn't surprising that some of them would come back to haunt him. But this situation was different. This wasn't about business or power, it was personal. His daughter was in danger, and he couldn't risk losing her. With a determined breath, he turned and walked back into the mansion. Marco was waiting for him in the main hall, his face tense with concern. "Everything's set," Marco said, his voice low. "We've got eyes on the target. We know where he's been, and we know where he's going next." The Mafia boss nodded, but the weight of the situation felt heavier than ever. "We move tonight," he said, his voice steady but filled with an underlying urgency. "I want this done. No hesitation. We can't afford to wait any longer." Marco gave a quick nod, and the Mafia boss could see the resolve in his eyes. Marco was loyal, and he understood the stakes. This wasn't just another job, it was personal. The Mafia boss couldn't afford to let anyone get in his way. His daughter's safety depended on it. As he prepared to leave, the door to the living room opened, and his daughter stepped out, her small figure framed in the doorway. She looked up at him with wide eyes, her face full of curiosity. "Daddy, where are you going?" she asked, her voice soft. The Mafia boss's heart sank. He had promised himself he wouldn't let her see this side of him, but now, standing in front of her, he knew there was no way to shield her completely. He knelt down to her level, his hands resting gently on her shoulders. "I'm going to take care of something important," he said, his voice calm, though his heart was racing. "I'll be back soon. You don't need to worry." She nodded, but there was something in her eyes that made him pause. A look of understanding. She was too young to know the full truth, but she sensed the tension, the fear that hung in the air. "Are you going to be okay?" she asked softly. The question hit him harder than he expected. He had always been the one to protect her, to shield her from the dangers of his world, but now she was asking about his safety. It was a moment of vulnerability that he hadn't anticipated. He gave her a reassuring smile, but inside, he was anything but sure. "I'll be fine," he said, though the words felt empty. "I promise." He kissed her forehead and stood up, walking past her with a heavy heart. As he moved toward the door, he heard her call out behind him. "I love you, Daddy." The Mafia boss froze for a moment, the words sinking in deeper than they ever had before. He turned back to her, his chest tight with emotion. "I love you too," he said softly, then turned and walked out the door. He couldn't afford to let his emotions cloud his judgment, not now. But as he stepped into the car, the weight of his daughter's love and trust settled heavily on him. He had promised to protect her, to keep her safe, and now it was time to face the darkness head-on. He couldn't let anyone, not even his past, tear that promise apart. The car sped through the streets, the lights of the city flickering past him. His mind was sharp, focused on the mission ahead. But there was a part of him that couldn't shake the fear, the doubt. What if he wasn't enough? What if, despite everything he had done, his daughter's safety was still in jeopardy? He couldn't afford to think like that. He had to stay strong, not just for himself, but for her. She was counting on him. The car pulled up to the location, a rundown building on the outskirts of the city. His men were already in place, watching the entrance. The Mafia boss stepped out of the car, his mind already calculating the best approach. He couldn't let this drag on any longer. He needed answers. He needed to end this. As he walked toward the building, He felt the weight of the situation pressing down on him. But he had no choice. He had made a promise to his daughter, and he wasn't going to break it. Tonight, everything would change. The Mafia boss moved quickly through the darkened alley, his steps steady but purposeful. His men were already in position, surrounding the building, watching every angle. There was no room for mistakes, no time for hesitation. His daughter's safety was on the line, and the person from his past who had reappeared in his life had to be dealt with, once and for all. The memories of those long-forgotten days flooded his mind as he approached the door. He had left that world behind, convinced that he could build something better, something more secure for his family. But the past had a way of following you, and now it was threatening to unravel everything he had fought for. He took a deep breath, trying to calm the storm inside him, but his resolve was clear. He would not let his daughter be dragged into this mess. Not now. Not ever. The door creaked open, and the Mafia boss stepped inside, his gaze sharp, scanning the room. He could see shadows moving in the corners, his men silently taking their positions. There was no sign of the person he had come to confront, but he could feel the tension in the air, the calm before the storm. A voice broke the silence, cold and familiar. "You've come a long way, haven't you?" The Mafia boss froze, his muscles tensing as he turned toward the voice. Standing at the far end of the room was a man he had once trusted, once considered a brother in arms. The man's cold eyes glinted in the dim light, and for a moment, the Mafia boss felt the weight of the past come crashing back. "You," the Mafia boss growled, his fists clenching at his sides. "You've been watching my daughter. Getting too close to her." "What?" The man smirked, his lips curling into a cruel smile. "She's just like her father, isn't she? So full of potential, so full of fire. It's almost a shame." The Mafia boss stepped forward, his eyes burning with fury. "Stay away from her," he said, his voice low but dangerous. "I've worked my entire life to protect her from people like you. You're not welcome here. You're not welcome in her life." The man's smile faded, his expression hardening. "You really think you can control everything, don't you? You think you can protect her forever?" The Mafia boss's gaze narrowed. "I will protect her from you," he said firmly. "I don't care who you are, or what you think you can do. I won't let you hurt her." The man laughed softly, the sound cold and mocking. "You always were so naive," he said, taking a step toward the Mafia boss. "You can't keep her in that bubble forever. She's already a part of this world. She's already involved. The only question is, how much longer will you be able to pretend otherwise?" The Mafia boss's heart pounded in his chest, but he stood his ground. "You don't know anything about her," he said, his voice filled with quiet anger. "She's nothing like you. She's not a part of your world, and I'll make sure she never will be." The man's eyes darkened, and for a moment, the room felt colder. "We'll see about that," he said, his voice suddenly icy. "I've been waiting for this day. I've been waiting for you to show up, to finally face the truth. You can't keep running from it. The past is always going to catch up with you." The Mafia boss's blood ran cold. The man wasn't just talking about him. He was talking about his daughter. He could feel the anger rising in him, the urge to end this once and for all, but he held back. He wouldn't let this man get to him, not now. He had come too far. "I won't let you destroy everything I've built," the Mafia boss said, his voice firm. "I won't let you tear my family apart." The man took another step forward, his grin returning. "Your family is already torn apart. It's only a matter of time before it all falls apart completely." The Mafia boss's hands tightened into fists, his knuckles white. He had no time for this man's games. No time for his taunts. His daughter was out there, and he needed to end this now. Without another word, he lunged forward, his fist aimed straight at the man's face. The man barely had time to react before the Mafia boss's fist connected with his jaw, sending him sprawling to the ground. The room fell into chaos as the Mafia boss's men rushed in, securing the area and ensuring that the situation didn't escalate further. But the Mafia boss didn't look back. He walked past the man, his eyes cold and unfeeling. "Stay away from my daughter," he said again, his voice devoid of emotion. "If I ever see you near her again, I'll end this. Permanently." The man groaned on the ground, but the Mafia boss didn't spare him another glance. He turned and walked out of the room, his heart still racing, but his mind clearer than it had been in weeks. He had taken a stand, and he had made it clear that no one was going to come between him and his daughter. He would protect her, no matter what it took. As he walked back into the main area, his men fell into formation behind him, and he felt the weight of the moment settle over him. His past, his mistakes, and his enemies were all behind him now. He had done what needed to be done. And now, the only thing that mattered was the future. His daughter's future. The Mafia boss stood in the quiet of the mansion, his thoughts swirling like a storm that refused to die down. The confrontation earlier had left him feeling both victorious and unsettled. He had made it clear that no one would hurt his daughter, no one would drag her into the chaos that had been his life for so long. But there was still something gnawing at him, an uneasy feeling in the pit of his stomach. The danger wasn't over. The man he had confronted may have been dealt with for now, but the undercurrents of his past were still very much alive, and that alone was enough to keep him on edge. He walked through the halls of the mansion, his steps echoing softly in the stillness of the night. The lights from the chandeliers cast long shadows along the floor, and the air felt thick with the weight of the decisions he had made. He had done everything to protect his daughter, but the reality was clear. He couldn't shield her from the world forever. She was growing up, and she was bound to face the same choices, the same darkness, that he had. It was a truth he had tried to avoid, but he could no longer escape. His daughter needed him, not just as a father, but as a guide to help her navigate the life she would inevitably inherit. And he had to find a way to help her, to teach her how to survive in a world like his. He reached his daughter's room and paused outside the door. His heart softened as he heard her soft laughter from within. It was the sound of innocence, a sound he would protect with every ounce of his being. He opened the door slowly and stepped inside, finding her sitting on the floor surrounded by her toys. Her face lit up in a way that made him forget all the danger, all the uncertainty. "Daddy," she exclaimed, looking up with a bright smile that melted his heart. She was everything to him, his reason for all the decisions, for the empire he had built, for the battles he had fought. "Hey, sweetheart," he said softly, kneeling beside her. "What are you up to?" She giggled, holding up a small toy car. "I'm playing with my cars. Want to play too?" Her invitation was simple, innocent, but to him, it was everything. He couldn't help but smile, but there was something heavy in his chest, something he couldn't shake. "I wish I could," he said, his voice a little strained. "But there's something I need to tell you." Her eyes widened, sensing the seriousness in his tone. She stood up, walking over to him and placing her hand in his. "What's wrong, Daddy?" she asked, her voice full of concern. He looked down at her, his heart aching at how much she had already grown. "Nothing's wrong, baby," he said gently. "I just want you to know something. You're always going to be safe. No matter what happens, no matter who tries to come after us, I will always protect you." Her small hand tightened around his. "I know, Daddy. You always protect me," she said, her voice soft and full of trust. His chest tightened with emotion. He had made her that promise, and he would keep it, even if it meant sacrificing everything he had. But the fear, the doubt, still lingered. He wasn't invincible. He couldn't keep her locked away forever. She would have to face the world someday, and he would need to be the one to help her do that. The doorbell rang, breaking the moment, and the Mafia boss stood up quickly. His mind shifted back into its familiar mode, the one that dealt with threats, with danger, with control. "Stay here, sweetheart," he said, his voice low but filled with urgency. "I'll be right back." His daughter nodded, and he gave her one last reassuring smile before heading toward the door. As he walked through the halls to answer the door, his thoughts remained on his daughter. He had promised to protect her, but the truth was, he didn't know what the future would bring. There were too many variables, too many unknowns. But he was ready. He would fight for her. He had to. He opened the door, finding Marco standing there with a serious expression. "Boss, it's time," Marco said, his voice calm but urgent. "Everything's in place." The Mafia boss gave a sharp nod and turned back to look at his daughter's room. "Make sure she's safe," he said. Marco followed him as they moved down the hallway. "We've got it covered," Marco assured him. "But you know this isn't just about keeping her safe from the outside world." The Mafia boss glanced at him, his expression grim. "I know," he said, "but she's going to need more than just protection. She's going to need the tools to survive in this world, to stand strong when the time comes. And I'm going to be the one to teach her." They stepped outside, and the Mafia boss took a deep breath, the cool night air hitting his face. He had made mistakes in the past, too many to count. But this time, he was determined to do it right. He would face whatever came his way. He would fight for his daughter's future, and nothing, no one, would stop him. The Mafia boss stood in the middle of the chaos, his mind still racing, but his resolve stronger than ever. He had fought for years to build this empire, to protect those he cared about, and to control every aspect of his life. But now, for the first time, he realized that power and control meant nothing if he couldn't protect his daughter from the world he had created. He had been willing to do anything, sacrifice everything, just to keep her safe. And in the end, it wasn't his empire, his wealth, or his status that mattered. It was her. His daughter had taught him more in the past few weeks than he had learned in a lifetime. She had taught him what it meant to be human again, to care for something beyond his own survival, and to understand that true power wasn't about domination. It was about love, trust, and protecting those you cared for. As he walked through the mansion, every step he took reminded him of how far he had come, but also of how much he still had to learn. The danger was not over. The threat to his family was still there, lingering in the shadows. But he had made a choice. He wasn't going to fight for his empire anymore. He was going to fight for her. He entered his daughter's room, his heart heavy with the weight of everything he had promised her. She was sitting by the window, her small figure silhouetted against the light. She looked up when he entered, her eyes full of trust. "Daddy," she said, a smile spreading across her face. "You're home." The Mafia boss's chest tightened. How could he have ever thought that his empire, the wealth, the power, could compare to the love he felt for her? Everything he had done, all the sacrifices, had been for moments like this. "I'm home," he said softly, walking over to her and sitting down beside her. "And I'm not going anywhere." She snuggled against him, her small hand resting on his arm. He looked at her, his heart swelling with love. The promise he had made to protect her still rang in his ears, but now, it wasn't just a promise. It was a vow to be there for her, to help her navigate this world, and to guide her through the challenges she would face. He had been so focused on building an empire that he had forgotten what truly mattered. But now he understood. His legacy wasn't in the businesses he had built or the people he had controlled. It was in her. His daughter was his legacy. "You're safe now," he whispered, pressing a kiss to her forehead. "I won't let anything happen to you. I promise." She smiled up at him, her eyes shining with a trust that he would carry with him always. "I know, Daddy," she said softly. "I know you'll keep me safe." For a moment, the world outside ceased to exist. The chaos, the threats, and the darkness seemed to fade away as he held her in his arms. He didn't need to be the most powerful man in the world anymore. All he needed was her, and he would do whatever it took to protect her, to make sure she grew up safe and happy. The doorbell rang, cutting through the silence, and the Mafia boss stiffened for a moment, his protective instincts flaring up. But he didn't move. He didn't need to. He had already made his choice. Whatever came next, he would face it with her by his side. He would no longer fight for power. He would fight for her. He would face his enemies, his past, and the darkness of his world to ensure that she would never have to. He had built an empire, but now he knew the truth. His real strength lay in the love he had for her. His daughter was his future, and he would fight for that future until his last breath. The sound of the doorbell faded as he sat there, his daughter in his arms, and for the first time in a long while, he felt at peace. His past might have shaped him, but his daughter would define who he was going to be. And that was enough. No matter what came next, he was ready. He was ready to face the world, not as the feared Mafia boss, but as a father, her father. In this gripping and emotional journey, the Mafia boss faces his greatest challenge yet, protecting his daughter from the dangerous world he has created. As he fights to shield her from the shadows of his past, he discovers that love and family matter more than power and control. This powerful story of redemption and sacrifice unfolds as he learns that being a father is the most important role he could ever play. Romance stories often depict characters who struggle with inner conflicts, and this one is no exception, as the Mafia boss confronts the darkness of his past and fights to protect his daughter's future. With tension building and love at the heart of every decision, the Mafia boss realizes that true strength lies not in dominance, but in the bonds of family. As he navigates this emotional journey, he finds himself changing for the better, all for the sake of the daughter he loves. Romance stories often remind us of the power of love, and this one is no different. It's a tale of a father's promise to protect his daughter and his determination to ensure she grows up safe from the dangers of the world he left behind. With every twist and turn, the Mafia boss must face his past and his fears, and ultimately, choose love over power. Romance stories that explore the depths of familial love bring out the most profound emotions, and this one captures the essence of that perfectly. Join the Mafia boss as he goes on a heartfelt journey to protect the one person who means everything to him, showing that sometimes, love is the strongest weapon of all.